You're listening to Thursday Night Tailgate with Chris Mascaro and Bob Lazari, where NFL legends live on. Back to you, boys.
It's him. He's alive.
All right, now joining us here on Thursday Night Tailgate is Carmen Fanzone. Let me give you some background on Carmen. He is from Detroit, Michigan, played his college ball at Ferris State University and later Central Michigan. Was signed as an amateur free agent by the Boston Red Sox in 1964. Made his major league debut with the Red Sox on July 21st, 1970, and got hit by a pitch in his very first plate appearance. Sort of welcome to the majors, Rook. His first major league hit was a double in a game against the Milwaukee Brewers, who were in the American League back then. And wouldn't it be something if the Red Sox ended up playing the Brewers in the World Series this year, knock on wood. Carmen played in the major leagues from 1970 to 74 for the Red Sox and the Cubs. During his playing days with the Cubs, he once played the Star Spangled Banner at Wrigley Field on his flugelhorn, and after his playing days went on to become a wonderful jazz musician. And we are honored and really appreciate the fact that he was patient with us tonight here on Thursday Night Tailgate. Hi, Carmen, Chris, and Bob. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, Carmen.
Hi, Chris and Bob. Nice to be here, and I enjoyed the last 10 minutes with Tony Mandarich. I didn't know who it was until you introduced him at the end, but it was very interesting for sure.
So, Carmen, I want to start by going back to your time with the Red Sox. You came up in July of 1970s. You came to a team that had a lot of young talent, guys like Tony C. and George Scott and Yaz and our friend Rico Petrocelli, all members of that team. I'm curious to get your memories. What was it like being around those guys?
Well, it was different. It was bittersweet. When I first got there, I was having a decent year in Louisville, and Billy Gardner was my manager, and we were playing in Montreal at that point. And he called me in and said, "I think the Red Sox are going to call you up." I said, "They are?" We had just played a doubleheader, and I think I had a home run in each game, and at that point I was leading the International League or tied for the International League in home runs, and it was almost, at that point, I felt the same way as when it was time to graduate college. I wasn't a great student, but I just kept taking classes, and you get to a point where it's time to graduate, and it's like, I'm going to graduate, and I felt the same way when the Red Sox called me up. So I was happy, but I didn't know what to expect. So when I got to Boston, and it was, I guess, in July of 70, They didn't have a roster spot for me, so I had to wait a day or two. And while I was watching the game in the stands, George Scott, who was playing third base at that point, broke his wrist. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, this is the way they write scripts. You get called up and then the third baseman breaks his wrist. Maybe I'll get a chance to play a little bit. And the way it worked out, it didn't work out that way. It seemed like everything that could go wrong went wrong. And was it Chris? Were you the one that gave all the details up front? Because
Yes, sir. I sure was.
Yeah, okay, Chris and Bob, and I've talked to Bob in the past, but hello to both of you. But when I got there, my first appearance in the big leagues with Boston, I got hit on the funny bone, actually, and we were playing California, and I think it was Bob. I can't think of. You should be able to think of his name, but I can't think of it now. Anyway, I was on first base, and I was getting dizzy because I got hit on the funny bone, so I had to be replaced for a pinch runner at that point. And then the next day, Gary Peters is pitching, and we're winning, I think, 6-0 in about the 6th or 7th inning. And Eddie Kaska was my manager, and he was my manager the year before at Louisville. And, of course, that was a kind of like an abbreviated season for me, and that was in 69. And I played a couple weeks, and I had back problems. I had back problems in spring training, missed most of spring training. And then I opened up the season, and I played a couple weeks, and we were in Buffalo, and I think I had hit a couple home runs on Saturday. And then on Sunday, we got rained out of Buffalo, so we flew back to Louisville. I couldn't get off the plane. My back acted up again, and I could hardly get off the plane. So for the next 20 days, I spent in traction in one of the Louisville hospitals. Ended up, the traction didn't work, and they finally sent me to Boston, and they operated on my back. So really, Eddie Casco only got to see me for about 2 weeks, so he didn't really know what to expect. And when I got called up for the Red Sox, he was the manager. But I think the reason that I was called up was that Pete Gammons wrote an article about me in the Boston, whatever paper he wrote, for the Boston Globe or whatever, and said, what is with this Carmen Fanzone? He's been in the system for a number of years. He's had some decent years, and nobody knows anything about him. How come, we haven't seen him? So shortly after that, the Red Sox called me up, and I think Casco, even though Casco was kind of like a utility infielder in his own right, didn't like the fact that he didn't have anything to do with me being called up. So he really didn't go out of his way and never very rarely spoke to me. So after pinch hitting and being taken out for a pinch runner the night before, on Saturday, we're leading, I think, 6 or 7-0. Gary Peters is pitching, and in about the 7th inning, he says, "You're playing third base next inning." So I go out to third base, and Jim Fragosi's the first hitter. And as luck or not luck would have it, he hits a ball to me at third. And I go to field it, and it bounces off my knee, and I go to pick it up, and I throw it in the right field. Now Fragosi's on second base, and the public address announcer says, "Air third base," twice. So on the first pitch of my experience, in playing defense in the big leagues, I make 2 errors. And Fenway Park, a lot like Wrigley Field, they're very small ballparks. And then it's not like it is today. You can't get a ticket in either place today, but back then there were a lot of empty seats. So you could hear just about everybody that had an opinion, you could hear them. And I remember just very, very distinctly somebody saying, "We waited 7 years for this." And after that, there was nothing that I could do that was positive. It was just awful. The couple months I spent there was just everything that could go wrong went wrong. So I didn't really get a chance to play. They played Kennedy. I can't think of his first name now, but he was a utility infielder just like myself. But he played John Kennedy. I think it was John Kennedy. He played third base most of the time, and I got 15 at bats in I think 2 months that I was there. So it wasn't a very happy time for me, and I was just happy for that year to end. And then I went to play winter ball in the Dominican Republic, and then I found out that winter that I got traded for another utility infielder. now I'm having another blank. He was with Chicago, and we got traded. 2 Italian utility infielders got traded for one another. But my time in Boston really wasn't very successful and very happy. And when I think about it to this day, I still have sleepless nights.
Well, Carm, it's great to speak with you again. You were very kind to join us for years on the television side, and now we're honored to have you on the radio, and appreciate the friendship over the years. It's been a lot of fun. But
it's my pleasure. My pleasure.
We've always talked, Carm, about your transition to Chicago and that first manager, Leo DeRocher, baseball legend and everything. Your impressions of him as far as a baseball man?
Well, the fact that he had been in baseball for so many years, it just he was a great baseball man, unquestionably. He was a great player, and he was a great coach. He was a great manager. He spent so many years in baseball, but by the time I got to him, in 71 when I came up from AAA in Tacoma, I was there the last month, and then I spent half of 72 with him before he got fired at the All-Star break. He spent most of the time in the dugout. He spent most of the time with a blanket over his legs. He wasn't very animated. He only knew really the 8 guys on the field. He really didn't know anybody else. So being an extra man with Leo DeRocher wasn't the best possible situation. When I first, I don't know, I probably told you this before, Bob, but my first at bat with the Cubs in the end of 71, I had driven to Chicago from Detroit because I asked them to, when I got called up from Toronto or Tacoma, I said, "Can I go back to Detroit and get my car and then drive to Chicago?" And they said, "Sure." So I'm driving to Chicago, and I get lost. I miss my flight. I called the traveling secretary, Blake Cullen. I said, "Blake, I missed my flight. Do you still want me to come? Because the team is coming home tonight from Pittsburgh." So he says, Sano's not feeling good, and Leo may need you. Just take the next available flight. Get here when you get here. So I take the next flight. I get into Pittsburgh about 8 o'clock. The game starts at 8. By the time I get a cab and get to the ballpark, and get a uniform, it's like the 3rd or 4th inning. I just get into the dugout, and I'm just physically so tired, because I had driven from Detroit, and it was a real hot day, and I had a '67 Chevy with no air, and it was just it wasn't a fun day for me. So I'm sitting in the dugout, and this is the year of '71 that the Pirates win the World Series. So Steve Blass is pitching this one particular day, and Milt Pappas is pitching for us, and I think we're getting beat about 9-0. Anyway, about the eighth or ninth inning, Leo looks down the dugout. He says, "Hey, you, grab a bat." And that "hey, you" was me. So I grab a bat, I go up, and the first pitch to me, Steve Blass throws me a slider for a strike, and he throws me another pitch, a fastball, and I swing at it. I hit a fly ball to left field, and I'm running to first base, and I'm thinking to myself, well, at least I didn't embarrass myself. At least I hit the ball. So I'm rounding first base, and I'm looking out, and Willie Stargell's in left, and Gene Kleins is in center, and they go back to the wall, and the ball goes over the fence. So now I've hit a home run in my first at-bat in the National League after just no success at all in the American League, and just everything that could go wrong went wrong with Boston. So I get to home plate, and Don Kessinger was there to greet me, and of course he knew what I had done, and everybody in the dugout knew what I had done, but of course when you're getting beat 9-0 in the big leagues, you can't really jump up and down and celebrate. So I'm just sitting in the dugout and just knowing that I did as much as I could do, but at least it was better than embarrassing myself. So after the game, we get on the bus to go back to the airport. And there was a couple extra guys that came up from AAA with myself, and there was only one seat left on the bus, and Joe Pepitone and myself were standing with no seat. And Joe Pepitone being Pepitone, he was like just screaming, this is the big leagues. We should have a bigger bus. We should have two buses. There shouldn't be any. We shouldn't have to stand and all this stuff. And the only seat left is next to DeRocher, because there's always the manager sits in the first row, and usually nobody sits with him. They let him sit by himself. So at that point, he says, "Carmen, come sit by me. Come sit with me." So all of a sudden now I'm Leo's boy. So, he sits down, he says, "Can you play anywhere else but third base?" He said, "We're going to get you in the lineup." I said, "Well, I placed him first. I played a little second." And so the next day was an off day, and then we go back to Chicago, and we have a weekend series with St. Louis. So the first 2 days, I think Jerry Royce is pitching one day and Carlton's pitching the next day, so I get to play. And I don't know if I went 1 for 4 or I didn't embarrass myself. And then the following day, I think there was a right-hander, so I sat, but for a couple of days I was Leo's boy. But he forgot my name very quickly, but it was kind of interesting, and being around him. He was, like I said, he was a great baseball man, and he had a great career, but by the time I got to him, he wasn't very animated, unless if the game was the game of the week, then he was like he was really a showman enough. He was sitting, was standing and playing catch outside the dugout with kids, and so that everybody could see that he was really into everything. So he was definitely showbiz.
Well, Carmen, it sure has been a delight having you as part of the show tonight. We'd love to spend some more time with you sometime. We hope you'll come back and join us again sometime.
Anytime you ask, I'm available.
Take care.
We appreciate that very much. Take care, Carmen. All the best to you and your lovely wife. We look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Bob and Chris, thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
Anytime, Carmen.
All right.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Carmen.
Bye.
That is Carmen Fanzone, former Red Sox and Chicago Cubs infielder. Bob, an interesting guy, and certainly I'm sure we haven't even gotten to the tip of all his great stories.
Yeah, how he met his wife is pretty fascinating. And you mentioned his job. He still works. He's very active, Chris, in the musicians union out there. That's what he basically does for a living. And but yeah, his wife, incredibly talented. He'll be the first to say she's the real musician in that family. But taking away nothing from him, the guy was incredibly accomplished. Just fascinating. I was a young kid and watching this guy play a national anthem, and then putting his glove on and going out to second base. I said, this is something that you don't see every day. It always stayed with me, and that's how I got contacted with him probably about 10 years ago. Pretty great guy, and we keep in touch all the time.